Welcome to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you are having a great Monday evening into Tuesday morning. Of course, Hammer Territory is a part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. Make sure you check out all the great content from the Foul Territory family of podcasts, both the team-specific podcasts as well as the main podcast. So much great content and coverage when it comes to the 2024 MLB trade deadline. And finally, an emergency podcast. Some finally awesome to be able to talk about a significant move. And the even better thing about it is, it involves some familiar names as the Braves are welcoming back to Atlanta both Jorge Soler and Luke Jackson. And for this emergency podcast, we wanted to get the band together. So both Scott Coleman and Stephen Tolbert are joining me to break down all the perspectives when it comes to Jorge Soler and Luke Jackson coming back to Atlanta. Scott, always a pleasure to talk with you. How are you doing this evening, sir?
Hey, Shawn, I'm doing really well, buddy. I am glad that we were able to finally get one of these emergency podcasts in. And as fate would have it, the news officially broke just before midnight Eastern time. So here we are deep into Monday night, but we of course wanted to do one of these emergency shows for a pretty big deal that not only is going to impact this year, but years beyond.
And Stephen, of course, me and you have talked about it. I know Scott and Brad have talked about it as well. 2 weeks ago, we did an in-depth, hour-long podcast about why the Braves had to make a move for the outfield. We went through a ton of different names. I went back and counted it. Over 15 different names were mentioned. But of course, one that wasn't wound up being the guy that the Braves went to get. First off, it's good to talk with you as always. But second off, yeah, we're bringing the band back together, but a very interesting but also very intriguing way of addressing the outfield needs by getting Jorge Soler returning to Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't, in our outfield podcast, I guess we didn't talk enough about DHs. I guess that's, the blind spot we missed because Jorge Soler has not played. I don't think he's played any outfield in 2024. He obviously played outfield for the Braves in 2021. We're obviously going to talk about that tonight about where exactly he fits in. But yeah, I mean, the Braves needed a bat, and we're going to talk about it all. But I think it's not more complicated than that. Jorge Soler can get on base and he can hit, and there's just too many guys in the Braves lineup that can't do either one of those things. And there's details that we'll get to about why San Francisco did this and why the Braves did this. But on the 30,000 foot surface level, I think it's just the Braves needed another guy who can hit the baseball, and Jorge Soler can hit the baseball.
Absolutely. So, of course, the complete deal, as was broke by Jeff Passan, just about 30 minutes ago, and the Braves official account confirmed, the final deal is Jorge Soler and Luke Jackson coming to the Braves for Tyler Matzek and infielder Sabin Ceballos, who, if you look at the various sites, was kind of in the 15 to 20 range in terms of, the Braves prospects. What stands out about this deal is that the Braves are basically taking on all of the salary of both Jorge Soler as well as Luke Jackson. So by them taking on all that money, Soler being in the first year of a 3-year deal with the Giants, the Braves taking on that money, they minimized the prospect costs, took on what's owed to both Soler and Jackson, and so that allows for them to keep, the majority of their prospects, which we'll also get into in just a moment. But Scott and Stephen, let's start off with initial reactions. Scott, again, obviously we knew that the Braves needed to make some sort of move. There was a lot of speculation on what level it may potentially be. Could it be a star? Could it be a rental? It seems like they kind of landed in between, but the big thing that stands out, they landed with a familiar name who we know was historic in terms of, his impact when he was here with the Braves in 2021, but also has continued to show that he is very lethal with the bat when he's healthy and on.
Yeah, on the sentimental side, it's fantastic to bring back Jorge Soler. Eddie Rosario, at least as of we are talking, is on the big league roster. So is Adam Duvall, a couple of heroes from that World Series run. It's great. We have so many fond memories of it. But from an on-the-field perspective, I was pretty surprised. And really, as Steven outlined, Soler's bat is still very good. Over the last month, Soler has been crushing the baseball, and on the whole, his numbers are solid. But he is a DH and has effectively been a DH for the past 2 or 3 seasons now. he has not played a single inning defensively with the Giants in the outfield and only had a handful of appearances out there with the Marlins last season. So the Braves are taking a pretty big and calculated gamble here that he is going to at least not crush you with his glove. I would imagine he will play right field, given how Truist Park's dimensions play. But at the same time, while there are questions about his defense and maybe even a long-term fit, it was silly to ignore the fact that the Braves desperately needed an influx of offensive talent. And that's something that Soler is going to bring. I would imagine he will hit right in the middle of the order. He gets on base at a good clip. He walks at a high rate, which is always going to help this team with the on base issues that it has. And then the power, even if it isn't quite what it's been in recent years, I would imagine getting away from San Francisco and that big ballpark, some of the power will begin to resurface with the Braves. So offensively, it obviously is going to help things. Defensively, there are questions, and down the road in 2025, there are questions. But at least for the very interim, I think my initial takeaway was honestly some surprise because Soler was really not on my radar at all.
Hey, FT fam, it's Alana Rizzo. I can't stop talking about Vuori. Vuori is perfect if you are sick and tired of traditional old workout gear. I wear Vuori in all settings, not just in the gym, because honestly, it's comfier than whatever you're currently wearing. No joke. I'm wearing Vuori daily leggings right now. They're high-waisted with the drawstring and cupped ankles. They look good and they feel great. You're going to love them. Vuori is an investment in your happiness. For our listeners, they are offering 20% off your first purchase. Get yourself some of the most comfortable and versatile clothing on the planet at vuori.com/foul. That's VUORI.com/foul. Not only will you receive 20% off your first purchase, but enjoy free shipping on any U.S. orders over $75 and free returns. Go to vuori.com/foul and discover the versatility of Vuori clothing.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that kind of stands out about why he may not have made the most sense, for the Braves, of course, was the amount of money that he's owed over the next few years. The fact that he really, does not play out the outfield anymore. But the other thing, Stephen, that stands out is me and you have talked extensively about it. The Braves' ability to hit right-handed pitching is something that has stood out as a need. Now, we know Soler can do that. He did that for the Braves in 2021. He did that last year when he had an incredible season at the plate in 2023. But this year, nearly 200 points higher OPS-wise against left-handers versus right-handers. And what stood out is that Jorge Soler has mashed right-handers in San Francisco, but on the road, he's gotten progressively worse. So not in any way, shape, or form saying he can't hit right-handers, but definitely a profile currently this year where it doesn't necessarily stand out his strength offensively is hitting right-handers. So the Braves are also banking on he should be able to handle that now that he's outside of San Francisco and probably in a place that he wants to be long-term.
Yeah, I mean, just getting out of that ballpark, that's where right-handed power goes to die. I mean, it's where all power goes to die. And that's going to help one. Soler's got like a 110 WRC plus for his career against right-handed pitching, which is not like all world, but it's above average. And, in this lineup, in the Braves lineup, above average is like a godsend right now with some of the stuff they're running out against right-handed pitching every night. And, again, the prospect cost is basically minimal. As long as you're willing to pay the money, and it's not my money, so I don't care. If the Braves are willing to pay it, then there's no downside because, you've given up, the 20th best prospect in probably a bottom 10 farm system or, maybe a little better than that. But like the cost is so minimal that, he does improve your offense against right-handed pitching. He obviously improves it even more against left-handed pitching. This also might not be the only move that we see in the next, 15 hours or however many minutes left before we get to the deadline. But it does help. It does help against right-handed pitching. There's obviously, like Scott was talking about, there's a sentimental side, when Braves fans see him put that uniform on again and, the visions of 2021 are going to come flooding back. He's still a good hitter. And Truist is a much better place to hit than San Francisco. So it will be interesting to see. I mean, where he plays is going to be fascinating. I think he's going to play in right field just because that's the smallest part of Truist Park. It's the easiest part of the park to play. Left field is actually a much harder place to play in Truist because it's just so much bigger. So I would not be surprised at all if he's in right field, and to see how he does. He played a lot of right field in 21. It didn't hurt the Braves. They didn't get burned by it too much. You can get lucky. You can put a guy out there and he doesn't have a lot of impact plays and you can kind of hide him. But you can also get unlucky. And there's a bunch of plays out there and he gets exposed quick. So it'll be very interesting to see what he does in the outfield and where they put him. But they needed more hitting. I mean, they just needed more hitting. We can break it down a lot, but they needed more offense. And, right before Passan tweeted that out, I tweeted something about the Braves outfield. If you look at the Braves outfield since Ronald Acuna Jr. went out, literally like the 29th best outfield in baseball since Acuna went out. Like they needed help. They needed some offense. So is the best fit in the world? No, but it helps the offense. And I'm not sure it's even more complicated than that, to be honest.
Absolutely, because I mean, at the end of the day, again, as you mentioned, we could talk about all the different breakdowns, all the different reasons why this may be odd, so on and so forth, but it's pretty simple why the Braves did this. They have Austin Riley, they have Marcell Ozuna, and they have Matt Olson hitting in the middle of that order. You would put Jorge Soler in front of those guys or behind those guys, that quartet of hitters, you can stack them up against any lineup in baseball. And it was with as well as Austin Riley's been over the past month, Soler's been over the past month, Ozuna's been all season. And again, we're starting to see, some signs of life from Matt Olson. That's what really stands out as being the reason why the Braves made this move. Alex Anthopoulos, once again, really investing in offense. So Scott, I'll ask you this question. The magic that was there in 2021 for the Braves was Jorge Soler adding power as well as on base percentage at the leadoff spot. So if we right now know that Riley, Ozuna, and Olson are manning the 2, 3, and 4 spots in the lineup, do you put potentially Soler back in that leadoff spot, or do you put him behind Olson in that 5th spot? How do you feel he potentially could fit in the lineup? It's good to have those 4 together, obviously, but would you put Soler in front of the other 3 guys or behind them?
It's a great question, and I'm looking forward to seeing that lineup in a couple of days whenever it comes out. I personally would lead Soler off in the lineup. I don't want to have Jared Kelenic catch a stray here, but Jared Kelenic has been unbelievably bad over the last month. I think Steven had the number. He is something like 3 for his last 64. You cannot have that in your leadoff spot. I don't care if you're the greatest defender in the world or the fastest player in the league. That is unacceptable for a leadoff hitter. So I would imagine that they will have Soler in that leadoff spot. I think he actually had a little bit of experience in that top spot with the Giants and even the Marlins as well in prior years. And you mentioned that big 4 at the top. I'm all about it. Hopefully the catchers continue to hit. And at some point in the next 2 weeks or so, you should be getting Michael Harris back from the injured list. And of course, now very curious to see over the next day, not even the next day, if Alex goes out and tries to add another bat to this lineup, because with Soler, it is an obvious improvement over Duvall or Rosario or Laureano or whoever else they're throwing out there. And if Alex goes out and adds another bat, perhaps a middle infielder to help shore things up, all of a sudden your lineup looks very, very good compared to what they ran out just a couple of days ago in New York.
Yeah, and Steven, speaking of that outfield alignment right now, it seems like that what we could see is, perhaps we could see, the usage of 5 different outfielders. Again, we'll see kind of how, it shuffles as time goes on, but is it as simple to you as, potentially seeing, like we saw Snicker go, in the final game against the Mets on Sunday, he went Duvall, he went Laureano, and obviously Soler would be in that equation in the outfield in that scenario. But then against right-handers, do we see them go Rosario as well as Kelenic? So do we see basically Soler in right field, and then you've got a platoon situation going on in center and left until Michael Harris II gets back? Now, of course, this question probably is much easier to answer after the trade deadline, but say this is is the only move that Atlanta makes when it comes to address their outfield. How do you feel they handle the outfield shuffle with Soler now in the equation until Michael Harris II gets back?
Well, the first part of that answer is we have to see who's getting cut from the roster, because they're adding Soler and they've got to get rid of one of their position players. So either Laureano or Duvall or Luke Williams, somebody's getting cut tomorrow, or at least optioned. So, and then you might have other deals. So the first part of that answer is we're gonna have to wait to see who's on the roster once all the dust settles. Um, to answer your question in more of the spirit of the question, I think Soler is going to play. He's the best of the group against right-handers. He's probably the best of the group against left-handers. As long as he's not just absolutely butchering you in the field, I think he's going to play. He definitely makes more money than all the other guys probably combined. So, yeah, when Michael comes back, my guess is it's going to be Michael in center, Soler in right, and then a platoon of sorts between Duvall and Kelnick in left. You definitely want to put Duvall and Kelnick in left because they have more range, and especially in Truist Park, you need more range in left field than you do in right field. So that would be my guess as we sit here today. But again, there's more moves that could be made tomorrow. We have to see who's going to be on the roster. We have to see how well Soler does in right field. If he's going to be in right field, that's my guess, but I'm totally guessing. I'm just using kind of what I would do, but that might not be what they do. So I would be surprised if they platoon Soler though, because he's the best hitter. He's definitely the best hitter of the group against right-handers, and he's probably the best hitter of the group against left-handers as well. So I think he's going to play, and we're just going to have to see what the roster actually looks like in, the next 15 hours or so before we can figure out exactly who's going to play where. But that would be my guess is Michael in center, Soler in right, and a platoon of sorts between Kelnick and somebody in left.
And Scott, obviously Soler is the big, thing to talk about when it comes to this deal. But, let's talk a minute about the other part of this deal in which you had, two members of the night shift exchanged for one another. After the 2021 World Series run, the Braves, both Luke Jackson and Tyler Matzek have experienced, I believe they both experienced Tommy John surgery since that occurred. And, Matzek obviously is kind of, trying to work his way back. He's never really recaptured the magic. Luke Jackson has struggled this year, though he's remained pretty healthy. But, just your thoughts on that. Luke Jackson definitely isn't the reliever that he once was, but he also could potentially still offer valuable innings. But, just your breakdown of that portion of the trade, as it seems as if the Braves feel that maybe they can recapture, some of Luke Jackson's effectiveness, that we saw in the past now that he's back in Atlanta.
Yeah, curious note here from Mark Bowman, the very longtime Braves beat reporter, that for the most part, including Luke Jackson and Tyler Matzek in this deal, was largely more just a financial component of the trade. I am sure for luxury tax purposes on San Francisco's end, which was obviously a driving factor in this trade as a salary dump. So, for Luke, he's been okay this year. On the surface, his numbers are pretty bad. He has a 5.4 ERA, although if you dig a little deeper, 4.4 FIP and a 3.9 xFIP. He still gets a decent amount of swing and miss. He has that slider that was one time really, really effective for him. So I'm guessing if you're the Braves, you are just kind of hoping for a bounce back. As things currently stand, Luke is the fourth or maybe even fifth right-handed arm in this bullpen. So it's not like you're throwing him out there into the ninth inning anytime soon. Really, in any kind of high leverage, I don't think Luke's going to see a ton of work. And, I wouldn't be shocked on Tuesday if Alex went out and added a bullpen arm and they just kind of say goodbye to Luke and just shake hands and say thanks. And maybe he signs on elsewhere. Or maybe they do plan to keep him and see if they can kind of revamp him and get him back on track. But regardless, when I think of this trade, it really was the Jorge Soler trade. And it just happened that a couple of friends in Tyler Matzek and Luke Jackson happened to be a part of it.
And Stephen, as Scott mentioned, one of the things that stands out about this is the financial impact of the Braves. The Braves have shown, they did it with the Jared Kelenic trade. They have shown a willingness to get creative by taking on, some money responsibility in order to be able to drive down the prospect cost to go get players that they want. They once again do it in this deal, but you've got to broke down, where the money, kind of goes in terms of making it fit for Atlanta, who obviously have one of the biggest payrolls in baseball, but some unique components to Jorge Soler's contract, I believe, allowed for this to be a fit for Atlanta, for this year and obviously beyond that. But just when it comes to the finances, how did this come together and work for Atlanta for them to be able to take on a lot of the financial responsibility, especially to Soler, to keep from having to pay a significant prospect cost?
Yeah, the Braves are right up against the third tier luxury tax. I think most fans probably know, or at least people that track this stuff probably know that by now. And Soler's contract that he signed with San Francisco was a bit odd because he signed a 3-year, $42 million contract, but $9 million of it was a signing bonus. So his actual salary for 2024 is only $7 million. And obviously we're more than halfway through the year, so there's only probably right around 3 million left on that contract for this year. So, that's what the Braves are taking on for this year. And then obviously he makes 13 million for the next 2 years. So the 2024 impact in terms of the payroll is actually not significant. At least from the Soler side. And then from the Jackson side, he was making 6.5 in 2024. So cut that in half because we're more than halfway through the year. So probably around 3, and then subtract what you took out when you sent Matzek away. So it's actually not a massive payroll add in terms of 2024. It's notable, and the Braves are certainly right up against the luxury tax. Now they know the numbers much better than we do because they're when you're calculating luxury tax, there's some stuff that is not always completely public knowledge and that we have to kind of guess on. So it's tough to say exactly where they are to the dollar. For that third tier, they know, and obviously they've done the math. But just looking at the numbers, like the big financial component to this is more about next year. Soler makes real money, 13 million the next 2 years. Luke Jackson's got a club option. I'm guessing that won't be picked up. It's got a $2 million buyout, but that means the Braves they're not financially tied to him past this year. So like Scott said, this is mainly the whole Jorge Soler trade. And the 13 million he makes the next 2 years is kind of the big chunk of it. What they added on for 2024, while it is real money, it's not like crazy money. And there's still a way they could probably get under that third tier luxury tax with some financial finagling in it. And again, we still have, I don't know how many hours, 14, 15 hours till the trade deadline. So they could do more. But yeah, this trade is not as, when you see the numbers, 3-year, $42 million contract, you might think the Braves are adding like $15 million to the payroll in this move for this year. They're not really. They're adding about probably around 5 million total for the 2024. And then the big stuff comes, 2025, 2026.
Well, and I'll open this question up to both of y'all because it is at least an interesting aspect of this trade. And that, again, 2 weeks ago when we were talking about what potential outfield options the Braves would go after, we had the whole discussion about, do you go with the rental to keep things kind of clean as far as your contracts go going into 2025, or do you get a controllable piece? We now know that they got a controllable piece. And not only that, they got a controllable piece that, with each passing year probably becomes a bit more of a clear DH possibility. Well, now going into next year, you've got Soler, you've got the ability to pick up Marcell Ozuna on a $16 million contract, but you also have Ronald Acuna Jr. returning, and you don't necessarily know where he's going to be in the field. Don't want to spend too much time on it because, of course, it is the focus for this year, but it is a very interesting aspect of this deal, having Soler as well as Ozuna and Acuna, along with Harrison Kelenic, going into 2025. Scott, just a few thoughts that you have on that. It's certainly a good problem to have, I think, but again, it's very interesting to see how it's all going to play out.
Yeah, definitely something that Alex Anthopoulos and team are going to have to figure out a couple of months from now. As we kind of suspected with the current state of the outfield trade market, it wasn't like there were 24 perfect fits for this team. I think in a perfect world, sure, you would have been able to add a rental who fixes all of your problems. But frankly, I don't think that player was on the market. Matter of fact, I'm pretty confident that player was not on the market given how many other outfielders have moved that the Braves feasibly could have been on and decided to pass. It does create a bit of a logjam for next season. Who knows what the future holds for Soler and Ozuna? You know that whenever he's healthy, quite obviously, Ronald Acuna Jr. is a focal point of this organization, but we just don't know what his knee is going to be like come April of 2025. Ozuna has been unbelievably good. Once again, it's hard to fathom the Braves not having Ozuna picked up for the 2025 season with his team option. And then Soler is owed enough real money that it's not like they can just send him off on his own or just dump him on another salary dump. I mean, maybe they could do that, but that's easier said than done. That is a long-winded way of saying they have a glut of outfielders and potential DHs for next year. And that is something that Alex will have to start figuring out come, hopefully November 1st after a deep playoff run.
And Stephen, I'll throw it to you again. I know that it is a lot of DHs. I know that it's, something that he's got to figure out, but also coming from the point of, hey, offense, especially in this year, offense is something that's needed. I don't think it's a bad thing to have too much offense, but again, just some odd fits. It's going to be something that's, going to be interesting to see play out, but I think that it's more of a good problem than, something that, they're not looking forward to taking on.
Yeah. And one thing I want to point out, it's not like the Braves are getting like gold glove caliber defense in the outfield right now with the group they have. Like we've seen some horrendous outfield play from Duvall, from Laureano, from Kelnick. Like if Jorge Soler is not great out there, it's not going to be like some major change for what we've seen in the last few weeks. Like the Braves outfield has been essentially the worst collection of players in baseball for that position group, at least. Like they've had the worst outfield in baseball since Acuna went down. So like, yeah, Soler, is he a perfect fit? Is he a great defender? No, but the Braves have had plenty of really poor, plenty of plays out in right field lately that have been very poor. And on top of that, no one's hitting. So, if Soler hits, then I think they're fine with it. And, in terms of what Scott was talking about next year, yes, it doesn't fit. Like they're going to have to do something, but there's plenty of time. I mean, and they could pick up Marcel's option and then trade him, or they could, if Soler has a decent stretch here with the Braves, he's only got 2 years and 26 million left on his contract. That's nothing crazy. You could potentially trade him. Kelnick might be traded. I mean, there's a million things that could happen. Like, does it all fit right now? No, but it doesn't have to all fit right now. Acuna is not coming back this year, and Michael Harris is still out, and the Braves don't have a decent. They basically have like half a decent outfitter on the roster right now. So, those are problems for November and December and January. Alex has got plenty of time to figure that out. But right now, they needed somebody that can hit and stand in the outfield, and Soler can do that. And so, I understand some people are confused about like the fit and stuff. I would just say he can hit, and that's what the Braves needed, and that's what they went and got.
So we knew the outfield was a big need for them. They added a bullpen arm. We'll see, what occurs when it comes to Luke Jackson. You can definitely say they got plenty of depth in their bullpen. So again, I'll throw another question out to each of you. What potential moves could be there left for the Braves? Because the one other thing that stands out about this is, Sabin Ceballos, again, he was a top 20 prospect in the Braves system, but the Braves still have all of their prospects in place from a overall farm system that we've seen multiple sources over the past, few weeks kind of say, hey, this is a better prospect system than some may think. Do you think there's another significant move, maybe for another arm of some sort, that the Braves could go out and do? Do you think that they pretty much, taken care of what they needed? Scott, I'll throw it to you first. What do you think potentially we could see Alex Anthopoulos do over the next, let's see, 16 or so hours before the trade deadline comes tomorrow?
So I think at this point, there's probably two areas that Alex could address. And we should note on this podcast that if you somehow missed it, the Braves got fantastic news on Monday that Ronaldo Lopez is seemingly going to be okay. He underwent an MRI after leaving the game early on Sunday. And by all accounts, I mean, he might be able to make a start next weekend. And I know at least the three of us, we were in our Slack chat going, man, this is just another crushing blow for the Braves. So the fact that Ronaldo Lopez seemingly avoided a serious injury is a huge deal. If he really is healthy and if Max Fried is really progressing the way that it seems like he is, I don't think Alex is going to add anything to the rotation, but just knowing that pitchers can get injured at literally any moment, it wouldn't shock me if he goes out and adds a veteran to the rotation. Probably not a high-end starting pitcher because there's just not a ton of those available, but it wouldn't be a surprise if he adds an innings eater. And then the other area that could really stand to be upgraded would be second base. Nacho Alvarez is just clearly not ready right now. Whit Merrifield was terrible with the Phillies, so much so that they released him. So if the Braves went out and traded for a middle infielder, it would be something I would be in favor of. I don't know how you feel about it, Steven, but to me, I would imagine that maybe a starter, although I think the chances are much lower now that Ronaldo is seemingly healthy. And then I would be in favor of trading for a second baseman of some kind because that middle infield situation is pretty bleak.
Yeah, I want a second baseman for sure because, yeah, I mean, Nacho is just not ready. And it's not a knock on him. He's just not ready. And like you said, Merrifield's very much a bench player, if that. So a second baseman, definitely. I don't think they get a starter. I think the news with Ronaldo, the good news with Max, the emergence of Swellenbach, all of these minor league guys coming back, AJ Waldrop, Ian Anderson, all of those guys being back in Gwinnett and healthy. I think the Braves can probably reasonably look at their rotation and their rotation depth and feel like it's pretty good. And acquiring pitching is so expensive that you really, it has to be a need that's kind of slapping you in the face for you to jump into that market. So I don't think they're going to do a starter, but yeah, second baseman would be tremendous. I mean, there's one in Tampa. We talked about it last night. The Braves didn't use any of their top prospects in this deal. I would love to do that deal. I don't know if it's going to happen, and probably not, but I would love it. And the only other thing I'll say is they could still go get another outfielder. I mean, honestly, you go look at the active roster and the outfielders and the names on that list, it's still rough. I mean, it's very rough, and Soler is probably going to end up replacing, I don't know, Luke Williams or Laureano, but like they could add another one if they wanted to, and replace somebody else that's on that list right now. Rosario hasn't been good, Doval hasn't been good, Kelnick hasn't been good for a long time. The bench guys are pretty forgettable, so it wouldn't be surprised at all if they added another outfielder. They also might be done. We'll see. Getting another big bat was the big thing, and they did that. So, yeah, the next 15, 16 hours will be interesting, but I agree with Scott. I think second base, some sort of middle infield help. I think now jumps to the top of my list of where I would be looking for the next 15 hours or so.
And the other fun thing, Scott, I want to get your opinion on this. The other fun thing that stands out to me is that we see a continued trend, when it comes to Alex Anthopoulos. Sure, he'll go out and get new guys. He'll go out and address needs, as he needs to. That definitely, master of the move on the margins is definitely there. But another trend that we continue to see, Alex loves to run it back with players that have been successful under his watch. We even saw it, with Jose Batista and Josh Donaldson. He was there they were there with him in Toronto. They both came to Atlanta. Obviously, Batista didn't work out like Donaldson did, but Alex has this trend of going back and getting guys who were successful in Atlanta. I definitely think it's a good thing because he's getting guys that have had success before, but it's just very, very interesting that he has this connection. It goes back to, I think some people talk about it, the clubhouse presence. He also wants to bring in guys that he knows were very positive impacts on the clubhouse, but I just think it's pretty cool, to see just how much he loves to run it back with guys who have been successful in the past, with his teams. And it's just very interesting that, now we're going to have Jorge Soler in Atlanta for, possibly the next 2.5 years.
Yeah, there's that familiarity, which is obviously a comfort. And clearly, whatever the Braves did with Soler following that trade a couple of years ago, it worked. Because Soler, I mean, just set aside the postseason heroics, but he was very, very good for them in the regular season. So I'm sure it will be great to have him back in the clubhouse. Again, we've talked about the impact I think he's going to have on the team offensively. And just to add a player who has kind of been through the battles of a postseason before at the very highest levels. I don't know. Some people probably swear by it. Others say it's just, another ball game. But I think at the end of the day, anytime you can add a player who has been through the trials and tribulations of a World Series run, not only once, but twice, Soler was with the Cubs. I think that's valuable in the clubhouse. And I'm sure whenever he makes it to the team in the next couple of days, there'll be a lot of hugs and high fives. Because clearly those guys who were still around from that World Series team have a connection for life. And it really was great just to kind of relive those memories tonight. I know a lot of folks were posting videos of the World Series run, and it brought a big smile to my face. So yes, that familiarity, I'm sure, is something that Alex covets, and let's hope there's a similar impact this time around.
Steven, any thoughts that you have on that?
No, I just think he knows what he likes. He likes good players. He likes good clubhouse guys. I think sometimes with Soler, like I think the postseason stuff, I agree with Scott. I think the postseason stuff kind of overshadows the fact that during the regular season, after they got him, he was a monster.
Yeah.
Like he really fixed the problem for the Braves when Acuna went down in 21 because he got on base. He had like a 360 on base percentage in the regular season after they got him. He walks a ton. And like that's another huge hole in this team. Like they need on base. They need somebody who can be on base. And even this year, he's got an 11% walk rate. The last month, he's got a 15% walk rate. He's got like a 340 on base for the year. He's got like a 380 on base in the last month. Like that's massive. Even outside all the clubhouse stuff, like just stop making outs. Like get on base. Like the Braves just need somebody on base in front of Riley and Ozuna and Olsen. And that's why I agree with Scott about putting him at the leadoff spot. I think that's where it's going to have the biggest impact. So, yeah, I understand people's reservations about the fit and right field and DH and all that stuff, but I mean they just needed somebody who can get on base. They need somebody who can hit right-handed pitching, and he can do both of those things. And that's why I'm a fan of the deal. They're gonna have to figure some stuff out in the offseason. They're probably gonna have to figure some money stuff out. But again, it's not my money. If they're good spending it, then I'm good spending it. And Alex can figure out the roster stuff in the offseason, but he hits right-handed pitching and can get on base, so I'm good with it.
Yeah, I think that's what the biggest thing that it comes back to is that, we talk about it, and it's not just familiarity, right? It's really successful familiarity. You needed offense. You needed someone that could add some value when it came to getting on base. We know that this team prioritizes power above all, and you found a singular source that can help out in all those areas. But to each of your points, and it's a great point, he's added value in those areas at the highest level back when the Braves were looking to make their playoff run. So, again, that quartet in the middle of the Braves order, Soler, Ozuna, Riley, and Olsen, if you can find it where maybe heading into September or in October, if 3 or 4 or all 4 of those guys are going, that's a very formidable lineup to go along with, hopefully, if healthy, one of the best pitching staffs in baseball. Again, we can get players back healthy. I'm not saying we're going to be the World Series favorites, but things could certainly look a lot better than many may perceive they do now when it comes to a playoff run for this team. But guys, any final thoughts? I know that we need to, still see some roster decisions made, and obviously any more potential moves will impact that. We'll also need to see Bryce Elder, be added to the roster tomorrow for him to make the start. But Scott, start with you. Any final thoughts when it comes to another significant move when it came to Alex Anthopoulos? But I think at the end of the day, one that makes a ton of sense, and you just kind of, leave yourself smiling, being like, man, he did it again. A creative way to go out and get a beloved player that we know has been successful here, and one that could be here for multiple years for future playoff runs.
Yeah, and the next couple of days should be quite busy just from a roster management perspective. There's going to be a lot of coming and going, and we will see what Tuesday holds before the trade deadline hits. Again, 6 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday is the deadline, and we'll see what the front office decides to ultimately do. Hopefully, we can do another one of these emergency podcasts for a trade or maybe even 2. But yes, the Atlanta Braves right now are a better baseball team than they were just a couple of hours ago. I'm excited to have Jorge there. As we have talked, I like the idea even more of him batting leadoff with the skills that he provides. And if he can provide a jolt to this outfield offensively, you get Michael Harris back in a couple of weeks, and who knows what other additions might be made in the next day. All of a sudden, you just kind of rub your eyes a little bit and go, okay, this lineup looks a lot better than it did with all of the injuries. The rotation, especially if you have good news on Ronaldo and Fried, is obviously encouraging. And you kind of buy low on a talented reliever in Luke Jackson, and we'll see if he makes any kind of impact. But on the whole, the Braves are a better team now than they were, and I think you have to be excited for that, and we'll see what the next day holds.
Steven?
Go get Brandon Lau. Go get Brandon Lau. That's what I want. Go get a second baseman. Can you imagine that top five? If you had Soler, Lau, Ozuna, Riley, and Olsen. I mean,
I know we're getting deep into this podcast, and Steven, you have been one of the leaders on the Brandon Lau train, but I'm happily on that same train with you. He makes so much sense for this team. He does so many things that this team does not do offensively. And you're not kidding. If you could get Brandon Lau from Tampa, this lineup could suddenly go from a disaster, as it has been for most of the year, to very, very good in a hurry.
Hey,
yeah. Brandon Lau's got a 135 career WRC plus against right-handed pitching. He plays second base. He can play a little outfield. He's got 2 dirt cheap options. Plenty of time, plenty of control. You didn't use any of your top prospects to do this deal. I'm just saying if we're signing off with something, go get Brandon Lau and see if you can make a run at this thing, because that lineup would be nasty. But yeah, this is a fun trade. I know I'm looking at my mentions right now on Twitter. I know people are very confused. They don't get the fit, all that, but I love this trade. They got what they needed. They added in areas where they're deficient, and it's going to make a very interesting next 15 hours, because now, the pressure's off a little bit. Alex doesn't have to do anything. I still think they need a second baseman of some sort, but they don't have to do that. They could probably figure something out, even if it's a smaller move of some sort. But getting a big bat was kind of the big thing, and they've done that. So it'll make the next 15 hours interesting, but I like this move, and I love having Jorge back. And yeah, it's going to be fun to watch.
For anybody else who's considering it, if they really want to run the full band back together, and I don't think they're going to get Jock Peterson because Arizona's still fully in it. Stephen Vogt, he's not coming back because he's managing one of the best teams in the American League. And while we may not get Guillermo Heredia back, who's currently playing baseball in South Korea, Scott, the Pink Swords may have to make another appearance. Do you think that we need to get that going again, or do we need to come up with our own thing for 2024?
I would love to have Guillermo and his swords back in the clubhouse, but I think he's actually doing really well overseas. So good for him for getting a chance to play. Let's hope that this is a big step in the right direction. This has been a very frustrating season. It really has been for months at this point. But anytime you can add and infuse some new talent into your clubhouse, it's only going to help things. So an exciting trade. Very, very curious to see what happens come trade deadline time. And yeah, boys, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we were finally able to do an emergency podcast, as it is 1:04 a.m. on the East Coast. So that is the current operating. So if we're all sounding a little delirious and tired, you probably know why.
Hey, but that's what makes it fun, being able to do this with Scott and Steven, as well as Brad, and some variation of the Hammer Territory team will be back with you doing another emergency podcast potentially later on. Hopefully not, in the next few hours, but tomorrow we'll also do a recap, obviously, of everything as well. But for Scott Coleman at Scott Coleman 55 on Twitter/X, Steven Tolbert at B_outliers on X. My name's Shawn Coleman. You can find me at StatsSAC. A lot of fun doing these podcasts, and a lot of fun when we know we're doing them about something that's going to make this Braves team better. Until next time, go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory Podcast, part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts.